The four Gospels, according to the Eastern version, and this is the supposed original ancient, very old Eastern Syriac Peshitta, from the original ancient, very old, but restored Apostolic Church of the East. This is translated from the Aramaic by G.M.Lamsa, author of My Neighbour Jesus, published around 1933. And he has a note here. Jesus was born and reared in the East under the influence of Eastern customs and practices, and he spoke in terms understood by the people of his time. It is, however, the author, G.M.Lamsa's, conviction at that time that his personality is far above everything that has been written and said about him. He is the portrait of God, or he's the uncreated creator, he's the Milter in the Aramaic, and apparently there's no English equivalent for that word, so the Galilean Aramaic translator Victor Alexander, who hails from Mesopotamia, Syria, so he's a native Aramaic speaker, translator, he ran around and found a word he believed to be equivalent, and he found manifestation, which in that sense means that God was known, he'd never been looked upon. Moses dared not look at him when he saw him in the sun disk, because he knew he had this instinct, so he was afraid to look at God face to face. He's too holy, too glorifying, or whatever. Had too much purity there or something, and he couldn't look at him because he knew he'd die. He just had that knowledge, right? With that feeling he'd die. So he looked away. So this translator has translated it into the word manifestation, which means something that was unknown and then it was suddenly revealed, i.e. God incarnate, the uncreated creator, the Son of God, comes in the flesh, dies amongst men, tells them the good news, etc., etc. But he has the face of God. So they can look upon God. He didn't run around and say, yeah, I'm God, but he dropped subtle hints. They could look at him and not die. Okay? He had this human appearance. Like we are created in the image of God, we have his visage, we have his likeness, and that's what he's referring to as portrait, because that's probably what it actually means if you translate it from the original Syriac Aramaic or Galilean Aramaic. So he is a portrait of God, and through him alone could we see God, just as we stated, right? The most significant fact to G.M.Lamsa, therefore, was this living personality who, by his miraculous powers, has transformed the life of mankind and made sinners into saints and given humanity a new hope. It's initialed by him. This symbol is the Aramaic character to designate deity. Three persons in one. That's the Tri-une. And appears on most ancient Syriac manuscripts. So, in reply to someone's nice comment that they gave us, why do you think you left it out? Okay, we just came across information that somewhere, I can't recall where exactly, so I can't give a source. This is quite a while back, that he actually left it out. We don't know if it was Dylan Downs or somebody else, but it came to our attention. So if we are incorrect, we apologise, because sometimes you get this information and it's told by 3 or 4 people have never met, have never sat in the same room, so it synchronises. So that fact becomes this established fact. You take them for their word, but they're actually wrong. You find out later. So that's just what happens. Right? So yeah, again, we apologise for that if we've led you down the wrong path. Okay. So if he knew that this symbol is the Aramaic character to designate deity, 3 persons in one, the Tri-une, then we're doubting now that he actually left it out. We're not sure, okay? But we'll keep looking to find out if he had this view, right? It's there, but he didn't like the idea of it or left it out or whatever. Okay, so this symbol is the Aramaic character to designate deity, 3 persons in one, the Tri-une, and appear on most ancient Syriac manuscripts. Introduction. When the King James Version was made, Europe was just emerging out of the dark clouds. Yeah, the Dark Age maybe because the Dark Ages because apparently Islam recruited Africans, sort of tricked them into becoming Mohammedans and then conscripted them into the army, and then they attacked Spain, invaded Spain, etc., and ruled Europe for like 400 years or so. So these Europeans had nowhere to go, no land of their own, whatever, because of these Mohammedans invading everything. So they were wandering through Europe in this Dark Ages era, right? It wasn't because there were lots of black people there. It's just that this is this time of hopelessness for these peoples, right? So eventually, I guess the Crusaders, the Vatican, etc., the Crusaders were sent out to conquer them and take Europe back. I'm not really sure. It's just what we've come across. You'd have to go do your own personal research on those histories. There was Spain. The Mohammedans went in there, took over, and then conquered most of Europe or something like that. You have to go do your own research on it. Don't take our word for it. Okay, so when the King James Version was made, Europe was just emerging out of dark clouds. The political and religious situation was still chaotic. Nation after nation was eagerly striving for freedom. The ecclesiastical structure and its hierarchy were weakening under the impact of scientific and religious research. Okay, so maybe this might be later, after this Mohammedan conquering all this stuff, some time after. The time was ripe for a spiritual revival in all lands. There was also an eager demand for the scriptures, and this was promptly met by devout scholars who offered translations. These changes were largely stimulated by the industrial and commercial activities, which greatly incited hopes for a better understanding of the Orient and the world at large. Hitherto, the East was practically unknown. Since the rise of Mohammedanism, or Islam, as you know it today, and the growth of the Turkish power, the East was isolated from Europe. It was this isolation which prompted Columbus to make his notable voyage in search of a way to the Orient, and which resulted in the discovery of America. But apparently this guy already knew, because they had the maps. They knew where America was. He was supposed to go look for the West Indies. Garbage, if he had those maps. Because the Spanish had these maps. They probably got them from the Arabs, the Arab Navy. What's that thing called? Starts with P. Their map, right? And they had it all mapped out, Antarctica, all that sort of stuff. So they probably got it from them. And then they really kept a tight grip on it. They didn't want the English, anybody else, the Dutch, to discover, to get hold of these maps. So when they come around Africa, the Cape Horn, that's why they always crashed into the rocks and stuff like that, because they didn't have those maps, those charts, to avoid it until maybe they scuttled a Spanish ship, or they boarded it and seized them eventually, right? But most times the Spaniards would either jump ship with these maps, or scuttle the thing, sink it, in the hopes that these British, depths, right, they can't swim down there and get these maps, something like that, right? They really, really didn't want them to know, to find out about these maps. That's why when the English, etc., turned up in different countries, hey, the Jesuits are there, the Roman Catholicism, etc., is already established amongst the natives, etc., right? How did these guys get there? Well, they had the maps, right? So yeah, that's what they always seem to find when they went to these new lands. The missionaries were, hey, Roman Catholic Jesuits are already there, and they've already, swayed the people and convinced them to convert and all this sort of stuff. Okay, these changes were largely stimulated by the Western area. We read that. The East was under Mohammedans or Islam. Columbus went to discover America. Indeed, there were but few adventurers who had crossed unknown seas and lands in search of fame and fortune. In those days, travel was hazardous and expensive, and transportation was beset with severe difficulties. The world was uncharted, and a few good roads were found only in some regions. Well, they didn't have the charts, as we said. The Spanish, etc., had them. The Arabs first, then the Spanish. And they're very, very protective of them. Didn't want them to fall into European hands. The world was uncharted, and a few good roads were found only in some regions. The races of the Near East were moreover hostile to the peoples of Europe, due doubtless to the devastations caused by the Crusades in the name of Christ. So they were going across Europe because they'd been driven out. The Vatican created these crusaders who went to take it back, Jerusalem, etc. So they were fighting these Mohammedans because they basically ruled most of Europe. Indeed, when a man undertook a long journey, he was hardly expected to return alive. It took Marco Polo, an Italian adventurer, 20 years to visit the great Khan in the Far East. Would that be the Genghis Khan or somebody else? And return home. The delay was no doubt caused by wars, revolutions, lack of caravans, severe winters in the several countries through which he passed. While he was learning the Asiatic languages, he forgot his own mother tongue. He was Italian, right? So he probably come back and he'd learn Chinese or something. It was only after the conquest of India by Great Britain and the rise of British power that any worthwhile contributions came from the Orient. In this particular period, European nations were more interested in the search for gold, greed, in acquiring new lands than in investigating the wisdom and religions of the East. Under these circumstances, it is apparent how Eastern manners and customs continue to be as mysterious to the Occidental as those of the latter were to the Orient. Indeed, this strange misunderstanding still prevails. This is because Christianity is an Eastern religion and Bible an Oriental book. So it's not a Western or Greek or Latin book. This is why early and medieval artists portrayed Jesus and his disciples at the Last Supper sitting on chairs at a luxurious table in their Western style, instead of sitting on the floor with their legs folded under them, their hats on their heads, their shoes removed, and a large tray containing 2 dishes, a few spoons and a jar of wine in front of them. Yes, so it's all been added to, right? Even though Jesus was probably a carpenter trained under his father Joseph, but they had their traditions. They sat on the floor, etc., etc., as he just described. They didn't have tables. They didn't have beds that they, couches that they frolicked on, all that sort of stuff. That's hype. These artists and authors of books were not aware that many things which were in good taste in the Occident were in bad form and even repulsive in the Orient. So it's saying basically what they had in Europe, like these lounging couches or whatever, they were considered in the East. For instance, in the West, men help and honour their wives. In the East, wives are virtually the servants of their husbands and never sit at a common meal with them. The Oriental retains his hat and removes his shoes. The Oriental, do I do that? Say that? The Oriental retains his hat and removes his shoes when entering a house. Yeah, a lot of other cultures do that as well. Probably that's where they got it from. This order is altogether reversed among Occidentals or Europeans. They just walk with their shoes on, mud and all. A lot of people do that. In the East, it would be scandalous to play music during the church or mosque services. The absence of music is almost inconceivable in Western services. Yeah, they play that music and get you all emotional and all that sort of stuff, right? The piano, the organ. If an Occidental observes an Oriental praying 5 times a day, he would conclude that he is lazy or crazy. On the other hand, an Oriental is puzzled when the Occidental has to be urged to pray. Moreover, in some Eastern countries, women are still purchased or acquired. Men often marry girls who are underage, but by an oral pledge, the men do not take them as their wives until the age of maturity is reached. So, this thing about Muhammad and this Aisha being so young and all that sort of stuff, all this sort of stuff, where you don't understand their culture and that they may have taken responsibility of this younger minor, right, Aisha, the main example, but at a certain point when she's mature enough, maybe at an older age, 15, 16, something like that, whatever they decide, then he marries her, and then when she's a bit more mature, something like that, you know, thinks she's mature, then maybe you start thinking about having children with her. You got to look at the history, not just because some body trying to boost their religion as the number one, the chosen, all this sort of rubbish, right? We are the one. Ooh, look at them, poo them, you know, because of this relationship or whatever. You don't understand. Those people who get that thrown at them could turn around and say, well, Joseph was supposedly 44 and Mary was a minor. That's what we've heard through a Seventh-day Adventist person doing their studies and all that sort of stuff. They reckon, you know, he could have been older, 44, and she could have been younger, right? So, you know, that one. But yeah, again, you got to do the research and establish that fact as fact, find the evidence that proves it evident, etc., etc. You can't just go on a whim, or that somebody else said, oh, you know, did you know? You know, it could be completely wrong. They could have this hidden motive or agenda, or it's all propaganda. Okay, so moreover, in the East, moreover, in some Eastern countries, women are still purchased or acquired. Men often marry girls who are underage, but by an oral pledge, the men do not take them as their wives until the age of maturity is reached. Wives are often driven out of their homes by their husbands, with or without cause. All this is totally different in Western lands, where women are respected and have more to say than their husbands. Yeah, but these days, the wife is trying to be the husband, right? And the husband's so weak and a softie, she walks all over him, yeah? And they wonder why they have relationship problems, marriage problems. Indeed, customs constituted a great barrier between the East and the West. To this was added the barrier of distance. This is one reason why so much misunderstanding exists between the Orient and the Occident, as we explained, right? There's a difference in culture, different in mindset. This is why some of the things in the Bible are magnified. For instance, the little lake in Galilee looks as if it was an enormous body of water, the Mediterranean, and the tiny boats appear as large ships. Tiny states of only a few square miles are regarded as kingdoms. Joshua conquered 31 kingdoms east of the Jordan, which had a territory of not more than a few hundred square miles, whose inhabitants were mostly shepherds and farmers. Check out Joshua 12:24. Travellers are often disappointed when they see holy lands which are so different to what they had pictured. Yeah, some artist has made it, yeah, miles, hundreds and hundreds of miles in width and all this sort of stuff, made the ark look like a watermelon, slice of watermelon, or a sushi roll, all this sort of stuff. And all these giraffes and monkeys and elephants, you know, with their heads hanging out the windows. These and like differences illustrate the difficulties of Occidentals in understanding the languages and customs of Orientals, because they use a lot of idioms, right? And if something to us is illogical, doesn't make sense, we consider it, no, that's a load of rubbish, that's not true. They may admit, yeah, okay, it's not true, but we still believe it anyway. It's just the way they are, right? Their mindset. These and like differences illustrate the difficulties of Occidentals in understanding the languages and customs of Orientals. All the greater is our indebtedness to those translators of the scriptures who, in the face of unsurmounted difficulties, have given us versions which stand as monuments to their scholarship, zeal and devotion, and who challenged us to follow in their steps. Prior to and since the Reformation, many attempts have been made to translate the Holy Scriptures and to explain their message, which in the original language, it would be Tav Asherah, Lishan Artigas Saprea, sacred scribal language of God, spoken by God to Adam and Eve in the garden. The original Tav Ivri, or the original ancient, very old Hebrew, and the Koine Greek, which are long dead languages. So today we've got modern modern vernaculars, right? Modern version. Prior to and since the Reformation, many attempts have been made to translate the Holy Scriptures and to explain the message, which in the original language was simple and lucid. Problem there, they may have had idioms, way of expressing things, so it makes it kind of hard as well. And to throw light on some obscure passages which have lost their original meaning when interpreted in terms of modern civilization and European customs. In spite of these numerous undertakings, the Bible still continues to perplex people, baffle, confuse, etc. This fact explains why new translations of the Bible have continued to appear from time to time. They keep doing these revisions, these re-editings, adding to it, taking away, copies of copies of copies of copies of a copy, not from the original manuscripts, because these, even though they're out there, they either ignore in favour of their Western theology or terminology and say all originate from the Greek. Everybody spoke Greek, God spoke Greek, Jesus spoke Greek, all the disciples spoke Greek, etc., etc., or Jesus was black, God was black, everybody was black, that sort of thing. During all the centuries of scholarly endeavour and controversy, the East has practically been silent. Hardly anything has been said for or against what the West has done with the Scriptures, and that's what we, the Ministry of the Roth, bring to all, because we've looked at the translation project and the comments, the information of the native-born Aramaic speaking translator Victor N. Alexander, who dives deep into all of that, right? Why is the West ignoring the Eastern theology, the terminology in favour of the Western theology, terminology, and so forth? Why are they ignoring it in favour of their Greek? Everything was written in Greek, or Latinized form of Greek, theology, scholarship, etc. Right? During all the centuries of scholarly endeavour and controversy, the East has practically been silent. Hardly anything has been said for or against what the West has done with the Scriptures. This silence has been maintained from the days of Tatian, Ephraim Cyrus, and Narcissus, Assyrian writers who were noteworthy commentators. The reason for this was not lack of interest in what constitutes the basic principles of religion and thought. It was rather due to certain unavoidable circumstances, or we would say prejudice, bias, etc. Because Western Christianity says, the Jews lost the right to be chosen of God, etc. And now we Western Christians are the ones who've been chosen by God. We've taken over. They've got nothing to do with it anymore. They're a lost cause, etc., etc. When it's all bogus. Eastern Christianity was prosecuting its work with vigorous enthusiasm, in the assured confidence that Christianity would soon become the universal religion in the East and the West. In those early days, the Persian Empire alone had several metropolitan provinces and 80 bishoprics, all the way from Armenia to India. Moreover, Christianity was winning favour in the eyes of the Persian court. There was no thought that any reverses might interfere with the spread of the gospel message. The horizon was then suddenly darkened by a cloud which appeared in southwest Arabia. Would that be Mohammedanism? We'll have a look, right? The claims of Christianity and of the victorious Roman Empire were strenuously challenged. What at first appeared to be Christians as a despised heresy, espoused by a nomadic chief, assumed big proportions and vanquished the Christian forces in the East. Schools of Christian learning were closed, monasteries were deserted, churches were converted into mosques, books which did not agree with Muslim or Mohammedan or Islam doctrines were burned, and writers of new books were punished. Christian scholars were conscripted to translate works of Greek and Syriac authors into Arabic for propagating the new and militant faith of Islam or Mohammedanism at the time, which was steadily ousting Christianity. Writers of commentaries, which even incidentally or unwittingly disagreed with the Quran, were promptly exiled or put to death. Christian authorship was under a severe ban. These unhappy events, accompanied with constant persecutions, put an end to any further attempts to throw light on the Holy Scriptures. Well, the disciples, the apostles who went into India, China, Japan, those areas, for a while there, they were accepted. They were helped to build their churches. They were relatively left alone to do their thing, even with some of the Mohammedans, caliphs and caliphates. But then sometime later on, another caliphate came along and he didn't like them, he despised them because he wanted to probably put his religion on top, right? So he persecuted everybody else. And then these Church of the East went through being called heretics, persecutions, murder. So they ran off with their manuscripts, etc., went somewhere else, lived relatively okay, and then something else happened. The Tamerlanes, Genghis Khan, right through to modern times, Al-Qaeda, the Kurds, pimping on them, ISIS threatening them, etc., etc., through the Kurds again, and so forth. So they get that persecution for centuries and centuries. Because obviously these caliphates, etc., wanted to establish their religiosity as the number one.